Forced conversion in Christianity. Christianity was a minority religion during much of Middle Roman Classical period, and the early Christians were persecuted during that time. When Constantine I converted to Christianity, it became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire. Already under the reign of Constantine I, Christian heretics had been persecuted. Beginning in the late 4th century, the ancient pagan religions were also actively suppressed. In the view of many historians, the Constantinian shift turned Christianity from a persecuted religion into one capable of persecution and sometimes eager to persecute. In February 380, together with Gratian and Valentinian II, Theodosius I issued the Edict of Thessalonica, recorded in the Codex Theodosianus. This declared Trinitarian Nicene Christianity to be the only legitimate imperial religion and the only one entitled to call itself Catholic. He also ended official state support for the traditional polytheist religions and customs. The Codex Theodosianus, Theodosian Code, was a compilation of the laws of the Roman Empire under the Christian emperors since 312. A commission was established by Theodosius II and his co-emperor Valentinian III on 26 March 429, and the compilation was published by a constitution of February 438. It went into force in the eastern and western parts of the empire in January 439. It is our will that all the peoples who are ruled by the administration of our clemency shall practice that religion which the divine Peter the Apostle transmitted to the Romans. The rest, whom we adjudge demented and insane, shall sustain the infamy of heretical dogmas. Their meeting places shall not receive the name of churches, and they shall be smitten first by divine vengeance and secondly by the retribution of our own initiative." Forced conversions of Jews were carried out with the support of rulers during late antiquity and the early Middle Ages in Gaul, the Iberian Peninsula and in the Byzantine Empire. Medieval Western Europe. During the Saxon Wars, Charlemagne, king of the Franks, forcibly converted the Saxons from their native Germanic paganism by way of warfare and law upon conquest. Examples are the massacre of Verdun in 782, when Charlemagne reportedly had 4,500 captive Saxons massacred for refusing to convert to Christianity. The Capitulatio de Partibus Saxoniae, a law imposed on conquered Saxons in 785, after another rebellion that prescribed death to those who refused to convert to Christianity. Forced conversion that occurred after the 7th century generally took place during riots and massacres carried out by mobs and clergy without support of the rulers. In contrast, royal persecutions of Jews from the late 11th century onward generally took form of expulsions, with some exceptions, such as conversions of Jews in southern Italy of the 13th century, which were carried out by Dominican inquisitors but instigated by King Charles II of Naples. Jews were forced to convert to Christianity by the Crusaders in Lorraine, on the Lower Rhine, in Bavaria and Bohemia, in Mainz and in Worms. The Rhineland massacres, also known as the persecutions of 1096 or Xerotetno, were a series of mass murders of Jews perpetrated by mobs of German Christians of the People's Crusade in the year 1096. The Worms' massacre was the murder of at least 800 Jews from Worms, Germany, at the hands of Crusaders under Count Emicho in May 1096. Pope Innocent III pronounced in 1201 that if one agreed to be baptized to avoid torture and intimidation, one nevertheless could be compelled to outwardly observe Christianity. Those who are immersed even though reluctant, do belong to ecclesiastical jurisdiction at least by reason of the sacrament, and might therefore be reasonably compelled to observe the rules of the Christian faith. It is, to be sure, contrary to the Christian faith that anyone who is unwilling and wholly opposed to it should be compelled to adopt and observe Christianity. For this reason a valid distinction is made by some between kinds of unwilling ones and kinds of compelled ones. Thus one who is drawn to Christianity by violence, through fear and through torture, and receives the sacrament of baptism in order to avoid loss, he does receive the impress of Christianity, and may be forced to observe the Christian faith as one who expressed a conditional willingness. End quote. During the Northern Crusades against the pagan Balts and Slavs of Northern Europe, forced conversions were a widely used tactic, which received papal sanction. These tactics were first adopted during the Wendish Crusade, but became more widespread during the Livonian Crusade and Prussian Crusade, in which tactics included the killing of hostages, massacre, and the devastation of the lands of tribes that had not yet submitted. Most of the populations of these regions were converted only after the repeated rebellion of native populations that did not want to accept Christianity even after initial forced conversion. In Old Prussia, the tactics employed in the initial conquest and subsequent conversion of the territory resulted in the death of most of the native population, whose language consequently became extinct. Early modern Iberian Peninsula. After the end of the Islamic control of Spain, Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492. In Portugal, following an order for their expulsion in 1496, only a handful was allowed to leave and the rest were forced to convert. Muslims were expelled from Portugal in 1497, and they were gradually forced to convert in the constituent kingdoms of Spain. The forced conversions of Muslims in Spain were enacted through a series of edicts outlawing Islam in the lands of Spain. This effort was overseen by three Spanish monarchies during the early 16th century, the Crown of Castile in 1500 to 1502, followed by Navarre in 1515 to 1516, and lastly the Crown of Aragon in 1523 to 1526. After the conversions, the so-called New Christians were those inhabitants, Sephardic Jews or Mudija Muslims, who were baptized under coercion and in the face of execution, becoming forced converts from Islam, conversos and secret Moors, or from Judaism, conversos, crypto-Jews. After the forced conversion, when all former Muslims and Jews had ostensibly become Catholic, the Spanish Inquisition targeted primarily forced converts from Judaism, who came under suspicion of either continuing to adhere to their old religion or having fallen back into it. Jewish conversos still resided in Spain and often practiced Judaism secretly and were suspected by the old Christians of being crypto-Jews. The Spanish Inquisition generated much wealth and income for the church and individual inquisitors by confiscating the property of the persecuted. The end of Al-Andalus and the expulsion of the Sephardic Jews from the Iberian Peninsula went hand in hand with the increase of Spanish and Portuguese influence in the world, as exemplified in the Christian conquest of the Americas and their aboriginal Indian population. The Ottoman Empire and Morocco absorbed most of the Jewish refugees, although a large majority remained as conversos. Colonial Americas. During the European colonization of the Americas, forced conversion of the continent's indigenous, non-Christian population was common, especially in South America, where the conquest of large indigenous polities, like the Inca and Aztec empires, placed colonizers in control of large non-Christian populations. Historians broadly agree that most native populations that converted did so under the threat of violence, often because they were compelled to after being conquered, and that the Catholic Church cooperated with civil authority to achieve this end. Eastern Europe. Upon converting to Christianity in the 10th century, Vladimir the Great, the ruler of Kiev, ordered Kiev's citizens to undergo a mass baptism in the Dnieper River. In the 13th century, the pagan populations of the Baltics faced campaigns of forcible conversion by crusading knight corps such as the Livonian Brothers of the Sword and the Teutonic Order, which often meant simply dispossessing these populations of their lands and property. After Ivan the Terrible's conquest of the Khanate of Kazan, the Muslim population faced slaughter, expulsion, forced resettlement and conversion to Christianity. In the 18th century, Elizabeth of Russia launched a campaign of forced conversion of Russia's non-Orthodox subjects, including Muslims and Jews. Goa Inquisition. The Portuguese practiced religious persecution in Goa, India in the 16th and 17th centuries. The natives of Goa, most of them Hindus, were subjected to severe torture and oppression by their zealous Portuguese rulers and missionaries, and forcibly converted to Christianity. In 1567, the campaign to destroy temples in Bards met with success, with 300 Hindu temples destroyed. Prohibition was laid from December 1567 on rituals of Hindu marriages, sacred thread wearing and cremation. All persons above 15 years of age were compelled to listen to Christian preaching, failing which they were punished. In 1583, Hindu temples at Asilna and Kunkulam were destroyed by the Portuguese army. The fathers of the church forbade the Hindus under terrible penalties the use of their own sacred books, and prevented them from all exercise of their religion. They destroyed their temples, and so harassed and interfered with the people that they abandoned the city in large numbers, refusing to remain any longer in a place where they had no liberty, and were liable to imprisonment, torture and death if they worshipped after their own fashion the gods of their fathers, wrote Philippus Asceti, who was in India from 1578 to 1588. An order was issued in June 1684 for suppressing the Konkani language and making it compulsory to speak Portuguese, on pain of severe penalties. All non-Christian cultural symbols and books written in local languages were also ordered to be destroyed. Papal States. The Papal States were a theocracy in which the Catholic Church and Catholics had more rights than members of other religions. Pius IX's policies changed over time. At the beginning of his pontificate, together with other liberal measures, Pius opened the Jewish ghetto in Rome. After returning from exile in 1850, during which the Roman Republic issued sharp anti-church measures, the Pope issued a series of anti-liberal measures, including reinstituting the ghetto. The Mortara case was an Italian cause célèbre that captured the attention of much of Europe and North America in the 1850s and 1860s. It concerned the Papal States seizing from a Jewish family in Bologna of one of their children, 6-year-old Edgardo Mortara, on the basis of a former servant's testimony that she had administered emergency baptism to the boy when he fell sick as an infant. Mortara grew up as a Catholic under the protection of Pope Pius IX, who refused his parents' desperate pleas for his return, and eventually became a priest.